A man died in a village in eastern Guyana last year. That much is beyond dispute. Faiyaz Narinedatt, 26, a husband and father, was found dead by the side of a dusty road in the early morning of November 1, 2016. That night he had gone to a party hosted by a childhood acquaintance who had immigrated to Queens and recently come into Money Marcus Brian J. Narinedatt. 3 weeks later, the Guyanese police charged Mr. Bisram of ordering 5 associates to murder Mr. Narinedatt after he rejected Mr. Bisram's sexual advances at the party. By then, he could not be questioned because he had already returned to New York on November 2. It was not until July 4, at the behest of the Guyanese government, that Mr. Bisram was arrested by United States Marshals at his Rockaways Beach house and jailed at the Manhattan Detention Center. Last week, Judge Peggy Kuo of the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York certified that Mr. Bisram should be extradited to Guyana. The year since Mr. Narinedatt died has unraveled into a saga of bribery, corruption and social media-fueled attacks, stretching from No. 70 village in the South American nation of Guyana to the Guyanese community in New York. It has bitterly divided diaspora leaders in Richmond Hill, Queens, pitting Hindu priests, civic associations and relatives against one another. Last weekend, thousands flooded the Richmond Hill streets to celebrate Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights. Some community members supporting Mr. Bisram purposely stayed away in protest of the parade, which was run by a vocal critic of Mr. Bisram. Although Mr. Bisram is Hindu and the victim was Muslim, religion never seemed to be the divisive issue. It is about money, the two sides say. It has become something because of a person being rich and a person being poor, said Lisa Khan, 32, a cousin of Mr. Narinedatt who lives in Queens. Everyone used to get along perfectly fine before. Everyone used to be in the same crowd partying, having a religious function. Now, it's who has money and power and who don't. Along the route in Queens for the parade to celebrate Diwali, the Hindu festival of light, on October 14. Elias Williams for the New York Times. A shop in Richmond Hill, Queens, home to more than 80,000 Indo-Guyanese immigrants. Elias Williams for the New York Times. A tent along the Diwali parade route. Elias Williams for the New York Times. There are nearly 140,000 Guyanese in New York, making them the 5th largest immigrant group in the city. And like any other group, it has its own dramas and scandals. In April, the Guyanese-American real estate mogul Adil Ahmad was convicted of mortgage fraud and sentenced to 2 years in prison. He had cooperated with authorities in the conviction of the New York Senate leader, John L. Sampson, a Democrat from Brooklyn who has Guyanese heritage. In Queens, you find a replica of the bribery and corruption from Guyana, said Aubrey Bonnet, a professor at the State University of New York at Westbury who has written about the West Indian diaspora. It's a miniature part of the subculture. Since gaining independence from Britain in 1966, Guyana has been politically divided between 2 major ethnic groups, African and Indian. Mr. Bisram and his family are of Indian heritage. The current ruling party in Guyana is mostly made up of Afro-Guyanese leaders. More than 80,000 Guyanese, mostly Indo-Guyanese from the Berbice farming region, now live in the contiguous Queens neighborhoods of South Ozone Park, Richmond Hill and Jamaica, according to the city's Department of Planning. A Facebook photo of Marcus Bisram, accused by Guyanese police in a murder conspiracy. Mr. Narinedatt and Mr. Bisram went to the same school in Berbice. At an early age, Mr. Bisram's parents separated. He moved in with his grandmother, and his aunts also took care of him. We were all poor, said Dewanti Pariyag, one of Mr. Bisram's aunts, outside the extradition hearing last month. He know what's hardship, because he didn't grow up with parents since he was 3 and 4. At 16, after finishing high school in Guyana, he joined his father in Queens, she said. Mr. Bisram later went to the Allen School of Health and Sciences in Jamaica, Queens, for a nursing degree to be a home health aide, his lawyer said. He did not go to Hunter College, as was stated on the Marcus Brian Bisram Foundation website, which recently was deactivated. How a 20-something home health aide came to be the wealthy head of a philanthropic foundation is a bit of a mystery, even among those closest to Mr. Bisram. According to Mario F. Gallucci, Mr. Bisram's New York lawyer, Mr. Bisram met a benefactor whom Mr. Bisram declined to name. Even Mr. Gallucci said he does not know whether the benefactor is alive or dead. He receives a salary, and as part of his salary, which is very generous, he has taken it upon himself to donate to causes he sees fit in Guyana, Mr. Gallucci said. His benefactor, or his employer, agrees with his decisions where he donates the money. His aunt, Ms. Pariyag, said that she never asked him where his money came from, but considered her nephew to be blessed. Mr. Bisram started his foundation in the spring of 2016, and he pledged to donate $1 million per year, the equivalent of $200 million Guyanese dollars, to organizations in his country. There, the Bisram Foundation has built orphanages and repaired the traffic office of a local police precinct. It donated to community policing groups, blood banks, a cricket team, and laid-off sugar workers. It has given backpacks to poor students. Because of his wealth, Mr. Gallucci said, Mr. Bisram has dignitary status, and is given a security detail by the local police when in Guyana. The fateful party of last October 31st coincided with Mr. Bisram's philanthropic mission to Guyana, and community police officers, to whom Mr. Bisram was donating, were among the guests. Mr. Narinedatt was living in No. 70 village, awaiting immigration documents that would allow him to join his wife in New York. He was one of about 150 people at the party, according to Mr. Bisram's Guyanese lawyer. The entire village was invited. According to the police report, one witness, a 16-year-old cousin of Mr. Bisram, saw Mr. Narinedatt drinking rum along with other partygoers. When Mr. Narinedatt went to urinate in the backyard, the witness said, Mr. Bisram fondled his genitals. Mr. Narinedatt slapped him in the face 5 times. The witness, according to a police report, then heard Mr. Bisram issue the order to kill Mr. Narinedatt, using the local slang, "You all done." Bibi Shakira Aziz, the mother of Faiyaz Narinedatt, at a protest in Guyana, via Nuinality in Guyana. Police reports included 2 witnesses who saw 5 men beating Mr. Narinedatt. One witness saw the men throw Mr. Narinedatt into the trunk of a car. The victim was found on the side of the No. 70 Village Public Road after 4 a.m. on November 1st. At first, the police considered his death a result of a hit-and-run. But Mr. Narinedatt's relatives said they suspected that it was staged. By then, Mr. Bisram was in New York, his return flight pre-planned, according to his lawyer. Frustrated by the slow response from local authorities, Mr. Narinedatt's uncle Abdul Rizam Shafiq said he went to officials in the capital of Georgetown 2 weeks later. "You had a lot of covering up here, in Berbice, a lot of covering up from the first set of police who handled the matter," Mr. Shafiq said in an interview in Guyana. At one time they were claiming it was an accident, but when you look at the body, it wasn't an accident. Mr. Narinedatt, according to the coroner's report provided to the Guyanese police, had multiple skull fractures, a fractured spine and arm, along with a ruptured spleen and liver and pulmonary contusions. He also had alcohol in his system. In the months after the party, and then after Guyana issued a warrant for his arrest, Mr. Bisram lived a very public life, giving winter coats to the needy, accepting humanitarian awards, and socializing with friends at Queen's restaurants and bars. On the afternoon of July 4th, Mr. Bisram was preparing for a holiday party at his 5-bedroom, 3-story beach house in the Rockaways that he purchased in 2015. His aunt, Ms. Pariag, recalled that she was making Guyanese cook-up rice when U.S. Marshals came to arrest him. Pooja Pittam, the wife of Mr. Narinedatt, who was killed in Guyana after a party held by Mr. Bisram. Elias Williams for the New York Times, in a basement apartment in the Bronx, Pooja Pittam lives with her parents, her older brother and her 18-month-old daughter, Asima. They share one bedroom. Her husband, Faiyaz Narinedatt, worked as a carpenter and, as a Muslim, taught at the mosque next door to his house in No. 70 Village. In February 2016, Ms. Pittam arrived in New York with her parents and older brother. She was 7 months pregnant. They were sponsored for green cards by her paternal grandfather. Mr. Narinedatt stayed behind in Guyana with their son, Aftab, 3. Ms. Pittam said that soon after her husband's death, members of Mr. Bisram's family had offered her husband's family bribes not to go to the police in Georgetown. The first sum, according to Ms. Pittam, was $50,000, $10 million Guyanese. The next was $250,000, $50 million Guyanese. "I refused," she said. "It can't actually bring Faiyaz back. He was an only child. That money can't comfort Faiyaz family." The lawyer for Mr. Bisram in Guyana, Sanjeev Dadadan, said it was the opposite, that Mr. Narinedatt's family had asked for money from Mr. Bisram's family to stay quiet. "That's a lie," Ms. Pittam said, shaking her head in response. It was not until the first extradition hearing at the end of September that the two sides finally saw one another inside the Brooklyn federal courthouse. Mr. Bisram's friends and family numbered more than 40. Most were wearing business attire accented by yellow, in a show of unity. They filled 4 rows in the courtroom. Some of the 16 attending in support of Mr. Narinedatt's side had nowhere but the jury box to sit. They wore white t-shirts proclaiming justice for Faiyaz. One supporter of Mr. Bisram testily confronted a Brooklyn Hindu priest who claimed to be on Mr. Bisram's side but also appeared to support his critic, Lakshmi Singh, a Queen's television personality who had organized the local Diwali parade in which the priest was planning to appear. Ms. Pittam brought her daughter, who fussed while the lawyers presented their arguments. When he entered the courtroom, Mr. Bisram did not at all resemble the coiffed image he has maintained on social media. His hair was uncombed and his eyes were bloodshot, brightening only when his family and friends waved to him. Scenes from Little Guyana in Richmond Hill, Queens. Elias Williams for The New York Times. Elias Williams for The New York Times. Elias Williams for The New York Times. The conflict in the Queens Guyanese community came to a head in December 2016 when Ms. Singh hosted a roundtable discussion about Mr. Bisram on her South Asian-focused cable channel, ITV Gold. Let's Talk with Lakshmi. She asked three panelists pointed questions on the Bisram case, including the role of his wealth and those who support him. "We have a strange community," a Guyanese-American educator, Chuck Mohan, said on the program. "That somehow, if you supposedly have money, you are put on a pedestal." Ms. Singh also asked the panelists how the official police report of Mr. Bisram's unwanted sexual advances would affect the LGBT community in Queens. Muhammad Q. Amin, the founder of a prominent gay rights group, Caribbean Equality Project, said it was irresponsible and potentially dangerous for Ms. Singh to speculate on Mr. Bisram's sexual orientation when the accused had never made a public statement about it. "The ramifications of such rumors could be serious in Guyana," Mr. Amin said, since the country still has laws against sodomy that could be punishable by life in prison, even if they are rarely enforced. Mr. Amin declined to comment on whether Mr. Bisram donated to his organization. He did, however, viewed publicly with Ms. Singh. He said that the Caribbean Equality Project was left off an email list to have a booth in last weekend's Diwali parade. Several LGBT artists did participate. Ms. Singh said she used to be good friends with Mr. Bisram, having first met him after his float won the 2015 Diwali parade. He offered to donate $10,000 for the 2016 parade, but she said she refused when Mr. Bisram's associates insisted that he be on the promotional posters, larger than Ms. Singh's namesake, the Hindu goddess Lakshmi. Lakshmi Singh, a Queen's television personality, who had organized the local Diwali parade in Richmond Hill. Elias Williams for The New York Times. But Colleen Chattergoon, a board member of the Bisram Foundation, blamed Ms. Singh for igniting the controversy, saying she was the one who had taken advantage of Mr. Bisram, including when she stayed at his beach house for free. Ms. Singh said that she had been invited. Back in March, Mr. Bisram sued Ms. Singh as well as one of Mr. Narinedatt's cousins for defamation. He claimed some comments they made about his guilt on Facebook, and what Ms. Singh said on her television program, were false and malicious. The suit alleges that Ms. Singh spread rumors on social networks that the plaintiff was a homosexual. That is not true. The case is pending. "I wanted to go and tell the judge that this man is wanted for murder," Ms. Singh said. "I'm not intimidated by him or his money. I'm doing the right thing." The squabbles expanded to almost comical proportions over the summer. Weeks after Mr. Bisram's arrest at his beach house, a flyer titled "Petition to Arrest Richmond Hill Crooks" showed up in stores and as inserts in free newspapers. Peppered with Guyanese slang and photos, it accused local priests and businessmen of accepting money from Mr. Bisram. No one took credit. Soon after, a letter was sent anonymously to Guyanese-owned companies and Hindu temples about the turmoil that is ensuing in the Indo-Caribbean Guyanese community in New York. It blamed Ms. Singh and asked leaders to sever all ties with her. "Our community needs to heal," the letter wrote. It was signed, Hindus Community. A June article in the West Indian, a free paper distributed in Queens, detailed Mr. Bisram's humanitarian donations. One local recipient was Sri Devi Mandir, a Hindu temple in Richmond Hill with a non-profit humanitarian association, to which Mr. Bisram donated $2,000 in 2015 and $10,000 in 2016. "It's our duty to show gratitude to those who donate generously to us," the priest of that temple, Tilak Siratan, said in August. Mr. Bisram has not donated in 2017, Mr. Siratan said, but the organization still honored him last April for his humanitarian efforts. "You will always find that, in this community, no matter how much good you do, people will try to bring you down," Mr. Siratan said. In Guyana, he added, there is a saying, when you do a lot, people have a lot to say. When you do nothing, nobody has anything to say. Mr. Siratan attended the extradition hearings, sitting with Mr. Bisram's supporters. Several years ago, Mr. Bisram made a $20,000 donation to cover legal costs for another local temple, the Bhuvaneshwar Mandir. In return, he was made president of the temple in May 2015, according to Arun Gosai, the current priest. But Mr. Gosai said that Mr. Bisram resigned after 3 months. He said other leaders support Mr. Bisram only for his money. That's the main divide in the community, greed versus morals, Mr. Gosai added. Right versus wrong. A fabric store in Richmond Hill. Elias Williams for the New York Times. Ralph Tamesh, president of the Indo-Caribbean Federation in Richmond Hill, agreed. It sends the wrong message, that we are a corrupted people, he said. His group was able to raise only $500 for Mr. Narinedatt's widow. Ultimately, neither money nor gossip in Little Guyana hold sway over proceedings in the homeland, where the case appeared to be breaking down last month. The key witness who heard Mr. Bisram give the order to kill Mr. Narinedatt recanted. But then a judge was suddenly dismissed from the case, and proceedings started anew. Mr. Bisram's aunt, Ms. Pariyag, and his Guyanese lawyer, Mr. Dadadan, said they feared that because of his political connections to the People's Progressive Party, Mr. Bisram is being targeted by Guyana's party in power now. Mr. Gallucci, Mr. Bisram's New York lawyer, suggested that were Mr. Bisram to be extradited, his life would be in danger. He told the State Department that he will file a petition contesting the Brooklyn judge's ruling, which could take another 2 months, or longer. By then, he said, a Guyanese court might even throw out the charges against Mr. Bisram for lack of evidence. Mr. Narinedatt's family believes Mr. Bisram is trying to buy his freedom. Mr. Bisram's family distrusts the Narinedatt family's motives. We don't feel for them because they are lying, said an uncle, Ananda Pariyag, at the courthouse. They are making the story up to get a payback. It would seem that the two sides were irrevocably divided. And yet they were also related. I know them all. Kristendat Pittam, 53, the widow's father, said in the Brooklyn federal courthouse for the extradition hearing. He was leaning in the hallway after the proceedings, gesturing to the cluster 20 feet away. I grew up with them. They are my cousins. He went over to Mr. Pariyag, who was visibly surprised by the gesture, and shook hands. He went to another of Mr. Bisram's aunts and they exchanged pleasantries. That's your family. That's what you do, Mr. Pittam said. I am supporting my family too. Neil Marks contributed, reporting from Berbice, Guyana. A version of this article appears in print on October 22, 2017, on page MB1 of the New York edition with the headline A Murder Divides Little Guyana.